Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first WorkPool Masterclass. My name is Marius, if you haven't met me before, and I'm the WorkPool Product Architect, and I'll be hosting the session today. So, as we mentioned in the invitation, the focus is to take a topic in WorkPool or a specific function, focus on that, and empower you with the skills, the background, kind of give you a little bit of advice in terms of how to make use of it. And we're going to try and make it hands-on, that you can see what we do and where we go. I have made screenshots, so depending on the time, there will be a takeaway for you so that you can obviously go and pass this around in your team or make use of it as you see fit. And then also the idea would be, if you guys like this, to have future masterclasses where we tackle topics like process designs, kind of the 101 on process, web forms, managed mailboxes, and all the other many features that exist in WorkPool. Just general disclaimers and session rules as we live in a world of these. Please do keep your audio muted for the duration. Daniel will, at the end of the session, facilitate any questions. We will definitely have time for questions at the end. Please do keep in mind that what we're doing today, while we do endeavor to give you advice in terms of how to apply these things, how to think about these things, obviously you need to apply common sense and always consult your own internal team and the appropriate parties whenever you're making changes or before you make decisions. I think also just a reminder that we have a fairly mixed audience from various types of industries. So many of my content will be quite generic, and I want you just to take from that whatever is applicable in your environment, and then if you have any specific questions, we can tackle that at the end. The agenda for today, we're going to keep it short and sweet, going in terms of just explaining what is a binder, where do they come from, why do they exist, and how do they work. We're going to look at some typical structures and endeavor to give you some rules of thumb in terms of where to put documents and why. And then we'll do some just configuration of the binders to show you how easy it is, where you would go and what you would need to do to get it going. And then we'll spend a bit of time just giving you end-to-end examples, because once you have these binders, how do you now best get documents into them, and how do you manage that going forward? So should be no surprise. I'm not sure how many of you would recognize this environment or situation. I know from our own environment many years ago, we had a WorkPool filing cabinet or cabinets where we would store a lot of client files alphabetically. So each client you could find based on their name. Inside that, there would be a binder, which would then contain multiple files. And in those files might be more binders or sleeves that would have different information. So a lot of the binder concepts actually come from the old school filing cabinets. And to be fair, they worked quite well. I mean, it was nice. You have the folder physically, all of the contact information, everything would be in a specific place, would be easy to update. And then there would typically be different color folders inside it. So you might have a agreements one, compliance one, FICA one, and it was quite easy to find documents. Also because every document had one place that it could go into. And with WorkPool, that's also one of the philosophies that we would adopt. As some of you might know, there were real physical challenges with these filing cabinets. Many of you had storage rooms or areas allocated that you're paying for just for storing the documents. A real limitation was that only one person could work on a file at any single point in time. There were no backups, so if the file goes missing, then you have nothing. And what obviously we saw, and for many people was a trigger during COVID, is that if you don't physically have access to the file or you're not in the office, you can't work with confidence on that client's folder. Then, as a result, many people migrated over to the typical shared network drive. So they would have these folder structures that they would have created for themselves. And in many cases, they would then complement that with some kind of spreadsheet or filing system or CRM tool to kind of take care of some of the data, and then things would get a little bit confusing in terms of what goes where. And I mean, to be fair, these folders was a step up. It worked quite well, but it also had a lot of other limitations. As many of you have seen, and as we have seen doing many assessments, is that it could get quite messy quite quickly. Because if you didn't have rules or specific patterns in terms of naming conventions or where things go, you end up using search, which isn't always reliable or won't get you what you want. Obviously, permissions was a problem, having to maintain that, manage that all the time. We had a situation where, you know, some people became document hoarders. They would literally, everything that they get would throw that into the folder, and there was no more kind of discernment around what do we keep, what do we lose. Even in the filing cabinet, there was limited space, so you had a rule to take things out or weed it or add. There was a consequence to keeping all these documents, where electronically that wasn't the case. And also, you know, when Poppy came in, it was a real business risk in terms of all these bits and pieces lying all over the enterprise, because many people also would start keeping their own little islands of information because they didn't trust that this was meeting their individual requirements. And then if anything gets compromised, you know, it's a mess from a compliance perspective. And these folders, as I mentioned, might have mirrored what you had in the filing cabinet, but also people would be adding more to it, so it grew quite quickly. And other challenges people had is that they would only add, for some people, the minimum to kind of tick the box in terms of having the document there, but it would still become difficult to actually use those documents. So people would take like an email and try and squeeze everything they can into a conversation and the documents so that they can export that email as their proof. So you end up with a lot of unnecessary information. You end up with a lot of noise. And you also end up with people only putting the bare minimum in the last bit in the chain of events on the filing system, or the other way around, adding too much where it becomes impractical to find that. One of the limitations of this system was obviously also you couldn't really tag documents. So if you want to say, give me all of the financial reports, give me all of the documents with Poppy, you know, confidential information, it was difficult to get that. And also there was little or no audit controls around who changed something, where did it go, as people were changing these folders all the time. So I'm sure you can see where this is going and where binders might play a role. But I thought before we dive into binders, it's important that I remind you of the structures that already exist in WorkPool, because the golden rule is that you want one place where a document can be stored and that is obvious to everyone. It's okay to store documents in different areas as long as when there is a document, there's only one place to go and put it. So I'm going to just very quickly go through the WorkPool structures that do exist, so that you can see where those documents might reside. And if there's no space for it there, then typically binders would be the answer to that. I think a key thing to remember, please, is also to not make binders the new dumping ground for unstructured data. Naming conventions and things like that would still be important. And I think also just to give some people a reality check in terms of many people have this expectation that a document must be, you know, 1 or 2 clicks away at all times. But the reality is that, you know, more than 95% of documents you only touch once. So you want to make sure that you don't pay a price in terms of having too busy or noisy a system, when in those cases where you do need to go back, as long as there's a good way, an easy way to find it, that you can still leverage the structure in the way it was intended without having to make too much noise as a result. So obviously one of the primary ones would be your directory views. And just to give you some kind of pointers on what we would add onto a view or what one can typically find there. So In most cases, this would be static documents, so documents that rarely change. A document with a specific purpose in terms of your business. It might be like a service agreement or a contract. A document that you might refer to often. So in our support team, it might be to look at an escalation path or an SLA turnaround time. So we want the team to have access to it and query it not just from the view, because remember, a view document is also accessible from a process and a task and an email. So it's quite quick and easy to find that. And then obviously you don't want something that's going to be changing a lot, because every time there's a change, you have to go in and you've got to go update that. So as I mentioned, in our world, it might be service contracts. In your world, depending on your financial services, it might be a FICA or KYC view where you have specific identity documents that you refer to quite often, like a business structure. If you're dealing with contractors or service providers, you might have one where you store key documents like BEE certificates, your COIDA, letter of good standing, the service agreement that was signed with them. If you're in property, it might be building plans, it might be the current or last rental contract with either the tenant or the owner. And in the financial services space might be the last financial plan or even policy schedule. So depending on the document, keep in mind that you might also need some controls around that. So policy schedules and advice records, those it's important that you have a process in place that will govern how that is updated and when. And then obviously in terms of a design, some clients choose to have confidential information on a separate view that they can control that and tick the box in terms of POPI and GDPR. As I mentioned, some of the benefits of views is it's quite quick and easy to find a document. You have quite tight control in terms of who can access it. You get the benefit of processes being able to push to the view and pull from the view, so it takes away some admin work around that. You can use it in reporting to say, give me all the service providers without a BE certificate. And you can also access these documents quite quickly from tasks and from emails. Whoops. Then the challenges, I would say, or when not to use a view for documents is when you have exceptions or kind of special conditions attached to that. If you have too many attributes on the views, then they kind of lose their effect or it's difficult to find information. If you update these quite regularly, then it's also not the best one. And also for general documents, you don't want to end up having to create a folder for all of this, because I'm going to say a folder, I mean a URL attribute for that, because people end up scrolling and looking for documents, and especially if your naming conventions aren't defined, it's difficult to find them. I thought I'll just mention that for those of you who might not be aware, that WorkPool does actually have an HR module as well that's included in the system. If you have the HR role, you can access all the resource folders pertaining to a specific employee. It doesn't need to be an employee. It could be a contractor or affiliate. Some of our clients load these as external resources, so you get the benefit of using WorkPool to maintain all of your records confidentially. And I don't want you to go create an HR binder unless you have a specific need for it, because you get the ID document, you get the passport, you get your photos, you get your employment contract, your CV, qualifications, driver's licenses, and even proof of medical aid already have a place to be stored in WorkPool. So don't reinvent the wheel for that. Another one that we think is quite obvious, but just to remind you, is that your own company document or the entities that reside in terms of your WorkPool, those typically will be placed as documents under the document repository or the files section. So your standard operating procedures, training material, contract templates, all of that can go in here. And the benefits being that you have version control. You can use them as templates to generate documents. You can link them to tasks and processes. And These would not make sense to create binders for, because you would have too many binders. They would be duplicated in all the folders. And then second last one, people often forget or overlook the announcement section. If you have any documents that you need to distribute that are time sensitive or periodical, the announcement section works quite well for that. Excuse me. So schedules, maybe notifications from service providers, those can all be documented in the announcement section. And you can also see who's read and who's acknowledged that. So for some of our clients actually use it to disseminate information in the group, and they can track and see who's read and who's acknowledged that content. So you get other benefits from using it. And all of the announcements are always available under the archive, so it's quick and easy to find. And it reduces the noise for people who are using emails or Teams or WhatsApp to send these notifications out, and people end up in any case duplicating that information for them to remember or refer back to it. Then lastly, just don't forget that tasks and your processes are the typical containers for many documents that are transactional. If you're doing a specific type of work or project, or let's say an audit, then that information will all reside in the process, where you've got a complete visibility in terms of all the actions, communications, and versions of that document. So it's also got a quick and easy way to find documents. In this case, let's say the signed financial statements would be one of the attributes on the process. And anyone going on to the audit process can very quickly find that document without having to go too deep or through too many tasks. And I think what we see is a lot of people are using folders maybe on their desktop or on the shared network drive, where they're kind of keeping these things together. And then, as I said, taking the last document and saving it somewhere. But what we also see is that even if they have a separate filing system, after they found that document, they then still go back onto WorkPool anyway to go check and see, because it's the system of record, what we said, what we did, when did we complete it, who was involved in it. So you might as well just put it on WorkPool and spend a bit of time in terms of training to get people comfortable with finding tasks. And especially if you're doing annual work or quarterly work, as long as your naming convention is done properly, it's very easy to find these documents without needing to actually having to go check them into a certain area. Right, so if you still haven't seen a place to put a document, then binders is typically the answer to that. Where do you find binders? Well, you can click on the electronic folder. So all entries in the directory have a documents tab. And when you click on the documents, all the binders will appear. These are configured by you or your business. WorkPool will have one out of the box, which is general, and you can rename that. You can keep it. You can rename it to archive, and you'll notice that same with on the views. If you don't have access to certain binders, then those will be visible but grayed out. So keep that in mind in terms of your design. If you create 20 binders, firstly, it can be confusing of what you put where, but also you don't want too much noise in terms of the screen or it to be too busy. And anything that's selected, so your current binder will be shown in uppercase. So just in terms of this screen. Then, as I mentioned, for HR, you get exactly the same binders to be visible there. So as long as you can access the HR folder, you can get access to them. And binders are also accessible from emails. If you're composing an email, you can click on this icon. It will pop up, click on the binders tab and choose your binder. And then you can either click the file that you want to attach, or you can use the tags, which I'll explain shortly, to drill down or reduce the noise, find the file, attach it, and you can then send that out on an email. So quite easy to find, literally 1 or 2 clicks away. I thought I'll just mention, because many people are not aware, that you can also access and download these documents from the mobile app. If you tap on the icon for the folder, you get your same tabs there, and if you click on the Docs tab, all your binders will appear, and these are in real time. So if you add a binder or apply permissions, your mobile app will follow immediately, and you can then click on the icon there to download the document. And I thought I'll just also mention that this is not limited to binders. You can also access all documents on views and on processes also from the mobile app. So if you tap on the name, you can see all the views attached to the client. And if you then tap on the view, you can also see any documents that are attached there. So quite quick and easy. If you're on the road and you need to answer a question or access a document, you can do that also from your mobile app side. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of context in terms of what a binder is and typical documents that you will find in there. So let's just have a look at WorkPool and where you would configure these. All of them, all the admin functions are located under the document administration section, document binders, your document tags, and your binder permission groups. So those are the three that we'll tackle today, and it's all that you need to configure these binders. I mentioned that you'll typically start with having a general one. You can quite easily add a binder. Let's call it billing. You choose a color, and then you'll allocate permissions to that binder. So these will determine who can view, who can edit, who can add documents, and who can delete documents. I'll explain the groups as well. And it's always good to just add some notes to explain what the significance of this binder would be. Click on save, and there you go. So it's very easy to create a binder. If I go into the directory now and get this panel out of the way, and I go to Adept, click on my documents, you'll see that billing has now appeared on the list as well. So just some general advice on naming these binders. Don't rush in and go and create 20 binders. Do give it some thought. I know that not everyone's got a degree in information management, and we all do the best that we can. Try and leverage what you've done in the past or existing folder structures that you might have. Those are often an exact match in terms of what you would set up on the binders. You typically get two types or two approaches. The one is where you create generic containers, depending on the name, where you can put documents that make sense. And the other one might be departmental or a combination of the two, where you have specific business functions or teams or departments who have specific documents that they need to maintain, and you can then create those accordingly. I put an X in front just to highlight those, but obviously you wouldn't put an X in front. To give you some just general advice or guidance on the naming convention or what you would do, you'll see that we have a contracts one. It could have been called legal. It could have been called agreements, whatever works for you. Contracts just by default would include for me, agreements and legal. So for us, it's a good name. Certificates, depending on your environment, might work well for things like BE certificates, valuation certificates, certificates of compliance. So if you have projects that you're working on or properties and that's your folders, then having a certificates one can work quite well. At WorkPool, we also have a deliverables or project archive one where we can add source documents, photos, drawings, again, certificates if it's relating to a project. Some clients have compliance as a view where they can put any other FICA or KYC or SIP-C documents, so that can also work quite well. Some clients create one for meetings. I wouldn't recommend that because meetings really should be governed by tasks and processes. Also because the documents around that will naturally make sense there. Company secretarial would make sense. If you have a place to store letters, resolutions, there might be a lot of those, VAT registration, company docs, not your own company docs because those go into the files section. But if you're doing this or keeping record of other companies, it would make sense to have that. And then, yeah, you could have financial planning, you could have an audit folder, like I said, over here, binder to store specific documents. Really, it's up to you. And also you can merge binders. It's fairly easy. It's difficult to separate them after the fact, but that's fine. So setting up the binders, as you can see, fairly straightforward. You give it a name, give it a color, and away you go. Document tags. So just to explain the difference, a binder is essentially where you would find a document, where a tag is typically saying what is a document. So especially if you don't have control or specific naming conventions, then the tags can work quite well to tag documents to give context to them. And the kind of two purposes. The one is to give context or say what it is. And the other one is to also flag it for specific business purposes. You might have, any POPI information or confidential information that you want to flag. So if ever there's a question or a query in terms of a folder, that you can say these are all the POPI documents linked to this client's folder. And also some people might use it for contextual in terms of gear or other values. You can see that it is hierarchical, so you can actually create a tree of tags. When you hover your mouse over it, you can click on this icon and you can edit to rename it. You can add a child like these over here, and also you can merge or assimilate existing tags, so you can keep it quite clean. So once you've set that up, they become available immediately. And similar to the binders that are always present, tags are also present on, whenever you're checking in documents, and these are also mirrored on the files. So if I go into files and I'm adding a document, the same tags would appear over here. Right. So in terms of tags, that would be it, not too difficult to set up. And then the last one would be your permission, so binder permission groups. Again, hopefully not brain surgery. You can create a group. Let's call it the audit team. You can plug different people into that team. It's control and left click, or you can just select all of them. And then you decide what permissions you're going to allocate to them. They're allowed to view it, or they're allowed to delete, edit, and create. So you can pick and choose, and you can set up multiple groups and tie them to a binder, and then the highest permission for a user will apply to that binder. Right. So those are tags, those are the permission groups, and let's have a quick look at how do you actually add these documents into your binders. So you go into any folder, you click on documents, and then you have this button over here to click and add a new document. So I've got one over here that I'm just going to drag and drop. You'll notice that the panel, even though it's linked to this client, you can actually look up multiple clients. So you can take one document and you can check it into multiple folders at the same time, and also multiple binders. So obviously, I wouldn't recommend that, because then your design, you kind of want to ask, but why do I need to duplicate this folder in different places? There are good reasons sometimes for doing that, and WorkPool will allow you to very quickly and easily do that without duplicating the content or the document. And then on the right-hand side, you'll say, I'm tagging this. It's a service agreement, so it's a contract. Let's say it's year 2026. Click on Save, and then that document will be added into the contracts folder. Or where did I click now? Yeah, there we go. Just looking at the screen on the left-hand side, if you want to make changes to a document, you can edit the name. So if someone accidentally forgot to rename it or give it an appropriate name, it's not a problem. If you have a requirement to match the date to a specific date that's significant to you, you can override the date it was checked in. You can move a document to another binder. So I can move it from general into, for example, KYC. I can make a copy after the fact. I can edit the tags attached to it. So if I made a mistake or I've created a new tag, it's not a problem. I can move this document to another entry in case it was misfiled, or I can also copy this to another entry. Another feature that exists is you can download all the documents in a binder in one go. If you click on this icon, it creates a zip file that you can then get all those documents. On the right-hand side, there's an audit trail of all actions taken on the binder. So that's very nice from a compliance perspective. You can see who did what and where on every binder. It also records any document coming in and any document leaving, so that if you saw a document there in the past, but it's no longer there, you can still go look at the audit trail and find it. And then for the people who are used to the old WorkPool Documents tab, you can still find that under the search option. That expands to give you options to go look and find documents under the specific types of objects that exist in WorkPool. And then lastly, if we look at, there's also a tagging option. So in my example over here, I've only got 5 documents, but let's say you've got 100. You can use the tagging function to very quickly drill down and filter on only the documents that you want to see. So that just helps in reducing the noise quite a bit on these folders. And that's it. I mean, it's very easy to check in documents. It's very easy to update and tweak and maintain it. And at least you get the benefit of the audit trail as well. Right, we've done all of that. Also, not just viewing documents, you can also add documents from your mobile app. If you click or tap on the quick action bar on the app, you already have a lot of functions that you can use to take different kinds of media or perform different types of actions. And if you get a client to send you an email with maybe a document or a WhatsApp, you can download that and then use this function to upload it. If you tick the activity box, you can even specify the client's folder, and then it will create an open activity that you can go link later on, or otherwise it just uploads the document. All these documents end up under the documents for filing section. And from here, you also have add to entry folder. So that's basically adding it to a binder and adding to a view where you can even push this document to a specific attribute on a view. The nice thing with this is that you can do some cleanup and renaming and, you know, kind of massaging the file a little bit before you formally check it in. It also means you don't have to first download the document and then rename it and then upload it, and so potentially duplicating that document. Something else I wanted to show you, because I'm not sure how many people are aware that we have had the ability to add email macros or actions to WorkPool for many years. You can add custom functions where if I say I want to push attachments to a binder, I can, for example, click there and I can take an existing file. I can say, well, actually, I want to rename this to 27. I want to put this into the general binder, and I want to say this is whatever, click on save, and then push that into the binder. The benefit of doing this is that obviously you don't have to download, save it as, rename it, and re-upload it into WorkPool. You can do that without ever actually downloading the document from the email side. So that's just one example of a macro, but many clients are using it for different purposes to automate repeat actions. Maybe you've got a standard sales action that you need to perform, or checking in documents to a specific process. So those are all options that you can look at. And then also just lastly, for those of you using processes, some clients are using these script triggers that you can tie to a flow to automatically not just push information to a view, but also to actually push it directly into the binder with the correct name and the tags already configured for you. We are actually going to make this a standard feature in the future. We had a kind of sponsor for that feature, but that didn't come through, but we are going to be adding that as a feature in the future in any case. And then I'm not going to spend too much time today on historic data, but there's also options to do a bulk take on. So if you have a lot of an old archive or old documents, it is a typical project, but there are ways to structure the content so it can be taken on easily on WorkPool. And then also don't forget that you can use the rule processors on normal email mailboxes and also managed mailboxes, which is very useful. Some clients, like if you have to go through a remandating process or you have a bulk action, you can have an online signing platform where if the clients sign the document, an email comes into WorkPool with that document. WorkPool can detach that, update the process, put the document in the folder, and also push it to the binder section, all without a human having to touch that. So there's a lot of benefits and things that you can look at in terms of automation as well. Right. Final thoughts. So we have a bit of time for questions. Is please try and have a golden rule of only one place to put a document. Please do put in time and effort into training people and enforce that. Sometimes the short-term effort and the pain is definitely worth the long-term benefit. So there's no point in having rules if you don't follow them. Not everything needs to be stored and not everything needs to belong on WorkPool. It's okay. Some storage can get expensive. So if you have an archive and it's used purely for historical purposes, maybe that's okay. You have to look at what works for your environment. Always make it practical. You've seen a lot of ways to deal with documents. So question and query always, is this the best way? Is this the right way to do it? And find something that's practical, both in the short term and for you to find those documents later on. If you don't have the time to do it, I mean, we're seeing more and more clients, they know what they need to do, they just don't have the time for it. Then pay someone to do it for you. It's well worth it. You get the value back in time, within a couple of weeks already, if not faster. And then prepare and plan for the future. Obviously, with AI and agents and things like that coming in online, your document structures will best equip them to also perform their work. And it's very much in line with what WorkPool is, a business nervous system. So we want to become that primary system of record, and it really, all the institutional memory resides within WorkPool that you can use for whatever purpose, also that you own, that you can control, and that you can use for your own benefit. And obviously also in terms of the orchestration and allocation of work, delegation, all of that makes sense within WorkPool. So in terms of next steps, as I'm wrapping up, we'll share the presentation and put this on our YouTube channel. You're welcome to go have a look and help yourself, especially do a lot of the thinking. Daniel and the team's also prepared a binder blueprint session for you, for those who don't have the time to do it or just want to have a meeting and kind of get advice. So there's an option for you to take this up. Daniel, you're welcome to add content, but basically it's a pre-session questionnaire, and then you'll have a consult with someone from the team to guide you and help you through all of that. It's costed at 3,500 Rand, but again, it's supposed to save you time and get you to get the best structure in WorkPool. Right, that is it from my side. Any questions? Or Daniel, if you want to explain or expand on that, you're more than welcome to.